Welcome. We're back with Sean Jordan this week talking about Strata Bylaws and how they can help manage your Strata corporation. Hi, Sean.
Hello. Welcome. Welcome me back.
There we go.
I'm happy
Yeah,
to be
glad to
back.
have you.
Yes, let's do this.
There's been some good changes at StrataPress over the last month. You've put up a new website.
A new website is online now, and it's more designed for introducing people to what we offer kind of across the platform, because before it was kind of focused on property management companies and selling documents. And there was information about the self-managed strata, the strata owners portal and stuff like that. So we've added more, some testimonials and new design. We launched it with a new branding for the company after, I guess, 10 years of the old branding, and just had it all primed up, ready to put it out to a new audience of strata owners, because we really want to focus on providing solutions for self-managed stratas as well as professionally managed stratas and property managers. But in this case, our focus for the next little while is going to be with self-managed stratas. And that's what most of our new development is focusing on as well. Tools like accounting or bookkeeping, AI assistance, things like that, that can really, help a volunteer group of strata owners do what they have to do for their strata. Try and make it easier so it's not such a tedious task. And part of this comes down to understanding bylaws. When you want to, if you're self-managed and it's a new development, especially, you have an opportunity to create bylaws that help you manage your property and make it enjoyable for everybody. And that those standard bylaws, kind of what's issued to every strata, is kind of a template. It's kind of issued by the government, and from there you can customize. So that's what we'll get into, is how you can, especially in a new development, take advantage of that to develop bylaws that are, suitable for your property. So that's what the topic is
Fantastic.
today. And
that's a
yeah,
good one,
yeah, it's a
affecting
good one.
all owners, right?
Yeah,
So we're going to get together and do this every month. First Monday of the month, you and I are going to get on the line, talk through some of the issues that affect stratas on a regular basis. And this is a great one for us to really dive into
yeah.
together. So tell us a bit more about what the bylaws in a strata community are all about.
Well, let's just consider bylaws are the legal rules that govern how residents live together and how the corporation operates. And having bylaws creates consistency and fairness for everybody, because everybody be treated the same way through the bylaws. They prevent conflicts, they help resolve conflicts, and they can reflect the unique needs of your community, because every strata is different. So in particular, bylaws set clear expectations for behavior and use of property. It's kind of the first point. The bylaws are acting like a rule book for strata living, and they'll outline what's acceptable and not acceptable within the community, and help the owners and tenants and visitors understand those expectations. And so that's kind of the first step, is understanding when you move into a strata, there is going to be some rules, and that's what the bylaws are all about. And they're not supposed to be hindrance. They're supposed to enhance your living, at your community. It's supposed to make things better, so people understand how common property is being used. They understand how their behavior should be, with regards to noise and smoking and pets, things like that. And they kind of provide a unbiased platform, like without personal judgment. Your strata corporation can enforce rules that apply to everybody equally, and that can help build trust, and so on and so forth. So we'll talk about what kind of rules. I did a blog post this week that kind of outlines suggestions of what kind of bylaws you can introduce based on what kind of property you have and what kind of lifestyle you want to have in that property.
Excellent.
So, bylaws apply to everybody equally. They're clear, they're written, they help reduce disputes because you've got guidelines to work with. And
Yeah.
they'll help new owners and tenants adjust quickly to uh, you know when they come into a strata, they understand what are my expectations, or what are the expectations of me. So, and they, yeah, so it's all
Excellent.
consistent. They're kind of essential. And I think they're very important to consider quite deeply. Like, so with the blog post, when you have an opportunity to create bylaws, you're like, oh, where do we start? And everybody has their ideas, but the post I put up was to give you some ideas to get the conversation going. You know, what kind of things should you consider for these bylaws?
Excellent, because there is a set of standard bylaws that is published by
Yeah,
the province, and you can adopt those, or you can make the modifications that best suit your community and its
yeah,
residents, right?
exactly. And that's where, based on what kind of property you have, if it's a say a bareland strata with family homes, and you have parks with kids and playgrounds, you're going to have different rules apply to there, maybe regarding noise and traffic and cars, as you would have different rules in a high rise condo development downtown in Vancouver, where you got maybe smaller families, if it's just couples or single, single people living, their lifestyle may be different, so they don't want to be under the same rules as far as noise bylaws and other considerations like that. So yeah, so this slide, bylaws support fair and consistent enforcement practices. That's essential because they should apply to everybody equally. Um, I think that if there's consistency, it builds trust with the council leadership. Owners are more likely to respect decisions when the rules are
Yeah.
applied fairly and predictably. There's transparency, there's documentation. So bylaws will help with that. De-escalate conflict or avoid escalation of conflict because you have uniform enforcement, and people are more cooperative when they see that everyone's being held to the same standard. So that's 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 important.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is important. I mean, you hear cases, and we see a lot of things go to the CRT where there's complaints about unfair enforcement
yeah,
of bylaws, and people feel like they're
targeted.
being targeted, or that the Strata Council is going after them specifically. And often that's not the case, but there certainly could be cases where there is some bias or some
Yeah,
unfairness. So supporting those, yeah, consistent enforcement is really important. And there are very specific rules around, when a bylaw infraction has been reported to a strata council, the action that they need to take, and everything else. I'm sure
yeah.
we'll get into that.
So and they provide bylaws in place. The council does have the authority to enforce these you know bylaws that are being broken. And one thing to consider too is, like, if you don't enforce these bylaws, then they're not very useful, because if you don't apply them,
Yeah, and I mean, it's the strata council's role to enforce those bylaws, and they can't even delegate that to a property manager. They
yeah,
must do
yeah,
that.
and that you have to do that, because if you don't enforce the bylaws and the council's aware of a bylaw infraction of some kind but is letting it slide for that person, well, then you can't enforce it against somebody else. You could perhaps do an exception where you can have a written exception for something you're doing that's outside of the bylaws. Maybe it's temporary, maybe it's whatever it might be, but you can get exceptions. Doesn't mean it applies to everybody, and that's why it's called an exception. But it's kind of a written letter from the council. So yeah, so um,
And having them does really help maintain that standard within a community. And maintaining standards is part of what it takes to
that's
preserve
right.
property
Property
values.
values. So that's what we're on. Help preserve property values and community standards. Rules around maintenance and garbage disposal, exterior appearance, things like that ensure the property looks presentable. Um, so you want to have clear community standards, that this, and so people looking at your bylaws and your property, if they're thinking of buying there, know that the strata is well managed, and they have bylaws in place to avoid prevent neglect and deterioration, things like that. So, you don't want to ignore maintenance responsibilities. So, if that's a concern, because you'll always have different council members over a period of time, the bylaws will be consistent. And so, those
Yeah.
enforceable, what's required by the council or the owner, depending on what you're talking about, common area, limited common property, things like that, or just within a suite. um you have standards there that help keep the property maintained and looking good. So you don't want people.
And property value is about more than just
Yeah,
maintenance, right? Like it's about quality of life as well. If you've got an environment where there are no noise bylaws being enforced, where there are, loud pets, lots of
yeah,
smokers, you're going to find that unless you're targeting that type of owner, you're going to find that you have more people wanting to leave your community, and that will result in more sellers, and that will obviously impact property
yes,
value and the way that the community views
that's
your
right.
strata.
And then
So
the simple things too, like if you don't have standards, like I was been at Strata where they had specific type of window covering you could use. And people are like, oh, well, I want to change these to curtains or this or that, or people hanging flags in their windows. Or so you got a consistent looking building. It's a well designed building. It looks great. Everybody has the same type of shutters or window covering. And then you got one guy over here that's got like white drapes, or he's got a flag hanging in his window. And it's just like, okay, that's not part of our community standard here as far as, hanging Led Zeppelin banners or what have you, a big Union Jack or other flags in your window. And that applies to balcony use too. The bylaws will outline like you can't store bikes on your balcony,
yeah,
or you can't store anything on your balcony, those type of things. So some people might think, well, that's a little heavy-handed, or maybe it doesn't go far enough, but it's all based on the desire of the community, and two-thirds vote will get your bylaws passed, and then from there you go get them registered. But everybody's kind of on the same page, and there has to be pride of ownership, in your community to if everybody follows the same rules, everybody's more likely to take care of the property. And so things
yeah,
don't slip when you're like, oh, well, he did this, I could do that. And interior spaces too, outside your door, if you're in a condo development where people will have welcome mats on their floor. First of all, that's a fire safety issue. People are always questioning, why do I have to move my welcome mat? Well, and in case of a fire and there's smoke and somebody's running down a hall, they don't want to be tripping on a mat that they didn't see and what have you. So some issues you are over, they're superseded by uh, you know safety protocols and also city bylaws. I know with noise, for instance, people would say, it's loud at 10 o'clock or what have you. And so we got to enforce that, give them a letter. And it's like, well, the city bylaws are actually 11 p.m. and the city bylaws supersede your strata bylaws. So you can't enforce something that's not enforceable by the city bylaws. So things like that have to be considered as well. You can put rules and bylaws in place about facilities you own on your property, gyms and pools, gardens, things like that. But we'll talk about it at the end, some things you can't do with bylaws. I almost was thinking when before this webinar, you can make a bylaw just about anything, but the truth is you can't make a bylaw that infringe on people's rights and use of property and things like that. But I'll cover that at the end. So disputes, yes, disputes internally. So bylaws create a clear process for addressing complaints. In a lot of cases, you need a complaint, somebody needs to file. Bylaws are usually enforced, they're complaint driven. That's the only time somebody could ignore a bylaw infraction, is if nobody complained about it, and they can, yeah, we weren't aware of this until it's brought to their attention. But once it's brought to the attention of the council or the property manager, then it has to be enforced. So there'll usually be a letter just to address, here, this is what happened, this is the bylaw,
right.
try to avoid doing that again. And then they'll get a second infraction, probably has to do with a pet or something, and they may get a second letter. And by the third letter, it's like, okay, well, after this, now we have to issue fines, and you have to enforce that. And those fines and other remedies will be outlined in the bylaws, how much you can charge. And I even believe that the fine amounts are set through the Strata Property Act. I don't think you can arbitrarily
Yeah.
say,
Yeah. And they're higher than
yeah,
rule.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't just say, oh, well, you parked there. That's a $2,500 fine. It can't be that type of thing. It has to be, can't be crippling, the fine, but it has to, attract somebody's attention. Like if it's $250 per week when breaking a bylaw, but you just keep adding up, adding up, adding up. You will have to address that eventually. The strata can keep fining you based on how it's outlined in the bylaws. And then they can take action. They can put a lien on your property when they have a certain level of fines that haven't been paid, things like that. But on top of that, people that are, may want to dispute a bylaw. So there's dispute resolution. There's step-by-step process within, to
Yes.
keep it transparent. That these are the steps that will be taken. These are the opportunities you'll have to, explain yourself or defend yourself, however you want to put it. They'll request a written response, maybe, so that they understand what your position is. Because usually, when a complaint comes in, you've got one side of the story, you got to hear from the other side, and then you have to figure
And you do have the right, as someone who's received a bylaw violation letter, to request a hearing to put forth your explanation or your apology,
Yeah,
or because ultimately the goals of the bylaws is not to fine people, it's to try and create that alignment and make sure that they're all doing what they as a community think is in their
that's
best
right.
interests. So, it's not meant to be punitive. It is designed to
Yeah,
align people.
and not like in the U.S. You've got HOAs. Councils, strata corporations in BC are not a for-profit endeavor. They are, you know, designed to manage the property for the enjoyment of everybody and the benefit of everybody. You get down in the States where they got heavy-handed fines, but those HOAs, those homeowners associations, that's how they make their money. And they spend most of their time finding owners for little things and chasing after them, and not providing a process that's transparent, because those companies need to make money, and that's how they do it, because they're not interested, they're not owners, they're not council members. There's a council, but the company finding you in the US or in other jurisdictions, that's a profit business for them. So that's not what strata corporations here are all about. It's here to make a point, like, hey, if you don't want to keep paying more, let's resolve this, whether if it's um, with your pet, or you've got maybe did some alterations without the proper authorization, that type of thing. So yeah.
Right, right. You've seen that commercial, right, Sean? The one of the HOA enforcement where an HOA person goes around sawing off mailboxes and cutting down flowers and stuff. It's a great one, but it is a real difference in mentality where you're really enforcing the
Yeah,
rules, and they have a different profit
exactly.
motive than we're
Yeah, and I
seeking.
don't believe anybody on council really wants to fine somebody. They'll get to the point where it's like, if somebody's constantly using the parking, where they shouldn't be using it, or parking, what have you, there's remedies for that. They're outside the bylaws, but you can have a bylaw about enforcement, like your car gets towed after a certain number of hours or a certain number of warnings, those type of things. But it's not easy for, a council member volunteer to impose fines on another owner. Um, Especially if it's a large fine. So there's typically not a lot of large fines that I've seen. That might be $100, $200, and it's just to get to the point of like, okay, I don't want to do that again, because that's a waste of money. It's like getting a speeding ticket. It's like, oh, okay. So, and it has to be enforced. Otherwise, when it happens again, then it's not enforceable. So, custom bylaws reflect the unique needs of your community. So there you go. Strata's tailor rules to suit their specific environment, demographics, and challenges. Like I mentioned, Bearland Strata single family homes are going to have different types of bylaws than you would have in a condo complex downtown in a tower. So it can be, there can be location specific concerns. If you're near waterfront, salt water exposure, access for
Good point.
emergency services, security and parking, those are all kind of going to be location specific type things. Um,
Some will be amenity
yeah,
driven.
and they want to support your lifestyle alignment. Um, Rules that they're created to fit the values and lifestyle of the owner. if you're up in the, maybe in the interior, a little more rural, and you don't want your outdoors people. You don't want people smoking next door and having that smoke come drift into your complex. You don't want excessive noise, unauthorized renovations. I mean, those are all the common ones, right? So yeah,
They
so
are.
custom
Yeah.
bylaws will help,
We,
avoid the one size fits all governance of a property, because you can have nuances depending on the number of people that live in your development and the type of lifestyle you have. They'll be different if everybody in your development owns a bike and you want to make it easy access for where you put your bike. And, other places are like, no, that's not important and it looks junky. So it just depends on,
yeah. Yeah, yeah. And if someone's pulling their bike through the hallways, and
yeah,
it's Vancouver, it rains,
that's right.
so it can be muddy and create a mess if you don't have a designated area for it. So a lot of attention on strata owners is placed on what do the bylaws tell you that you can and cannot do as an owner. But there are also some sections within the bylaws that will clarify the responsibilities of council and
Right.
how they relate to the owners and to the tenants within
Yeah.
those communities.
So they'll define the bylaws. They'll help define who's responsible for what areas of the property. I've seen a lot of questions about, okay, well, my water pipe broke in the wall of my neighbor's place and it leaked down into my place. Who's responsible for this? So the bylaws will, um, let me, somebody started a vacuum cleaner real quick.
It can be quite tricky because there are circumstances where the definition of whether your wall
Yeah.
begins at the paint or in the middle of the wall can have a real bearing on who's responsible in the case of one of those
Right.
leaks
Those are,
or
those are kind of
events.
specific nuances, but there'll be also what applies to, yeah, what happens within your walls, what happens on limited common property and shared spaces, and what's on common property. So this would just, having it in your bylaws reduces the confusion and conflict that it can be arise. Like, is that my responsibility or your responsibility? Who's responsible for the windows? What about a new door? Who gets all that? So that can all be outlined in the bylaws. And yeah, so
Fantastic.
um, so that'll come down to also, when you have assets for the strata, um, a workout room or a pool or a boardroom, and those strata bylaws will outline the use of those. If there's a fee that has to be paid, what's expected once you're done renting that space, those type of things. There will be, certain things in the bylaws, and then there'll be just a kind of a list of here's what's expected, and if you want your damage deposit back, another way to put it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And it's not limited to just those amenities. You've got this limited common property, and a lot of people struggle with what that means. But you've got, say, a balcony, and it's for your private use, but it's not yours. It's limited common property because it's limited
that's
to your
right.
use. But there are still rules, like whether or not you can have bicycles on it, whether or not you can have plants and or water them, whether you can have a bird feeder or hang a flag or have a barbecue. So there's a lot of rules that affect the use of both common property, like your amenities, and then limited common property, which, again, depending on the type of community, maybe it's a balcony, maybe you've got an enclosed patio area because you're in a
Oh yeah.
townhome style community.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
lots of
and you
different.
have to be very specific in some cases, like what's allowed in the hallways, what's allowed in the stairwells, in the lobbies and other common areas. Like people just putting I'm going to put my ladder in the stairwell over here because I don't have room for it in my condo suite. So you'd be surprised if you don't. People were storing up in the attic where you have attic space above your condo and you're on the top floor, and people were putting storage up there, and it's like you can't do that, and that's it has to be in the bylaws that people will find space to put things that's out of the way, and if it's up in the attic and they have access to it, they'll stuff up there. Other things like, yeah, on your patios, barbecue use, smoking, hanging items on the patio, storing bicycles, things like that. And again, it's not to like just come down on people. It's to actually create. You're in a community, so you have to help maintain that community and the value of that community and so on. So everybody has equal rights on to enjoy common property, and the bylaws ensures one person's use doesn't come at the expense of others, for instance. So things like that. Yeah. So there we go with
We do. We talk a lot about the P's of this, right? You got people, pets, and parking
that's
tend to
right.
be the most common source of
Yeah,
angst in a strata community, and having a good framework to enforce that is
that's right.
critical.
Consistency applies to everybody. Pets as well. Ownership, size of your pet, type of pets. You don't want somebody next door who's got 10 boa constrictors, just for as a hobby and feeding them rats. I mean, you don't want that in your building, that type of thing. So you have to put the bylaws in place.
Most Yeah, most bylaws and sometimes rules underneath them are setting out the quantity of
Yeah.
pets you may have, the type of pets you may have, whether there are size restrictions or breed restrictions. And obviously, when it comes to smoking, there's a matter of personal enjoyment. So that's one of the things that I think is
Yes.
important. So yes, and so long as it's clear and uniformly enforced, these policies tend to work
Yeah.
very well. Talk to us, Sean, about changing your bylaws.
Okay, so bylaw change has got to be approved by a 3/4 vote of owners. You have to ensure there's a significant rule change can't be made without strong majority support from the other owners. Can't have a council come in and say, we're going to change this and do that. This was something that we've typically done at like an AGM or a special general meeting, not just a regular council meeting. And, there'd be education sent out ahead of time. Here's the bylaws proposal. This is what we're looking at. They will take time to do. They can take a year from starting them. And you have to have a council that's willing to take on that challenge of developing the bylaws for your development, especially if it's a new development. In fact, that's usually when it's happening is new development, get your standard bylaws, and then from there, one of the councils what they'll probably do is leave them for a year or two, standard bylaws, and start working out what do we need to enforce? What do we need in here? What are we not seeing at this point? And then so you're not creating bylaws. Here's the thing: when you create a bylaw, you have to enforce it. So if you're not willing
Yeah,
to be enforcing these bylaws, then keep them out is more probably a better thing. I mean, because otherwise, if you're not willing to enforce them, then they're not going to be enforceable. And I would be on a council meeting and somebody say, "Well, we should write a rule for this. We need a bylaw for that." I'm like, "All right, that's fine. You have to enforce this stuff. So are you willing to take your time to enforce something?" Because there'll be a lot of people with bylaws about meaningless things that are like, "Well, that's a passing thing. It might only happen once or twice, or we're getting rid of that thing, whatever it might be." So it has to be something that's significant. And of course, everybody well, 3/4 vote has to. I said 2/3 earlier, but it's 3/4 vote has to agree with the changes. So yeah,
right.
so um, owner approval, ensure demographic involvement. Um, so yeah, you get owners
You
involved.
you actually served as president of Strata Council, so you've
Yeah.
lived this, right?
And I've done
So that's
bylaws.
why you're saying
Yeah.
right. Talk to us about enforcement then. You've had the inside view, you've got the StrataPress view. I know that Paul, your co-founder, also has, been on his Strata Council. So you guys have been through this process a
Yes.
lot. Walk us
Okay,
through.
well, fair and consistent enforcement. I think what you want to do is, as a council, how can councils ensure that enforcement is perceived as fair and unbiased by all residents? So that bylaws will help with that. Enforcing bylaws fairly, consistently, and in good faith. So fair and consistent enforcement. Structured enforcement process, what steps can be taken to streamline the process while ensuring due diligence. So you want to make sure that you're providing a, a guideline so that whoever's being targeted for, I want to say targeted, but being, made aware that they broke a bylaw, they need to know, like, well, okay, well, now what do I get? Well, you get an opportunity to talk to the council about this and at this stage or what have you, and so you can argue it. Validity of bylaws. So how can councils regularly review and update bylaws to maintain their validity? Because things may change on the property. The demographics of the building might change. So you want to,
Sometimes the
yeah, and
provincial rules
sometimes,
change. We saw that happen with rental restrictions, and everyone that had those
yeah,
bylaws that limited the number of units that could be rented out long term. Short term rental restrictions are still
exactly.
possible. But now they had bylaws that were inconsistent with the governing legislation. So, I mean, even if they didn't formally update them, the government's
Yeah.
stance was what was valid, but it's on them to go check that validity and then approve and then file those
Yeah.
new
So the
bylaws.
council members should have some type of process in place regular to review the bylaws and update them if necessary. And if that's once every 2 years or 4 years or whatever it might be, then there should be something scheduled for that. Council member impartiality. What mechanisms put in place to ensure impartiality in such situations? You don't want council members being accused of targeting people. Maybe if there's some conflict, they might have to excuse themselves from the complaint process. If for instance, if the complaint was about a council member, or a
Right.
dispute between a council member and a strata owner, and maybe it's noise, whatever it might be, and bylaws breaking. So in those cases, you got to be aware that, okay, I'm involved in this. Just step out of the situation, let the other council members take care of it, but follow the bylaws and rules. Potential penalties. You got to figure out what factors should be considered when determining appropriate penalties for different breaches. Can't
Right.
just arbitrarily be, oh, well, make it $1,000. That'll prevent people from doing it. Well, if they do it, now you have to enforce this fine of $1,000, which is unfair. You have to be able to back that up.
Yeah, you're setting yourself up for a
Yeah,
CRT case if you are not following the prescribed
yeah.
guidelines, and if you
Kind of
are,
be better.
not
Yeah,
being
be
fair
be under the
about
radar a little bit there
application enforcement.
with the
Yeah.
fairness and the fines. Documentation. So councils have to consider how they maintain, comprehensive, organized records of support, enforcement. What are the actions? What took place? As a result of this bylaw infraction. Seeking legal advice. Under what circumstances should your council consider consulting, a lawyer, or the CRT uh, actions you can file with them. Um, Compliance with legislation, like you said, legislation can change. Got to make sure that your bylaws comply with relevant legislation. So that's pretty easy one. You can kind of get the information about what bylaws are what you can't do, and we'll go over that in just a minute. Kind of my last slide, I was talking about what you can't do with bylaws. And
Yeah.
communication with residents. How are you going to commute this information with the residents regarding bylaws? How do they know what rules they're supposed to be following? Do you put your bylaws in all the minutes of meetings? Do you make sure that people review them at AGMs? They understand them? You get a lot of people who say, well, I didn't know that was a bylaw. I didn't know you could do this, can't do that. Now, somebody moves into a building. We talked about this our last call, having a welcome package, including the bylaws. So those people
Absolutely.
understand. In fact,
Yeah.
those owners should have reviewed the bylaws before they even made an offer. Because if they don't agree with the bylaws, why would they want to live there? That type of thing.
That's a
Yeah.
very good
And then
point.
regular review came down to the kind of the other points about uh, in-
Yeah, ensuring that consistency, ensuring that they're meeting the
yeah.
needs of those owners in a community, and you touched on a couple of times here these bylaws that are not allowed in a strata corporation. Sean, tell me more. What can't
What
you
you
do?
can't do, well, you can't have bylaws that contradict the Strata Property Act. So some of those things are like fines might be outlined in the Strata Property Act. Um, you can't have a bylaw, for instance, that prohibits owners from attending a council meeting because that's allowed. You can't do things that are contradict the Strata Property Act. So that's one thing. You can't make bylaws that violate BC Human Rights Code. Banning children or people with disabilities from living in the building, discrimination based on age, family status, things like that. Can't have those type of bylaws. You can't have bylaws that override owners' basic rights. So I don't know. I don't have any examples of basic rights, for instance, but you can't. Might come down to rentals. There was I don't know if I haven't reviewed the changes for the rental, bylaws that the government's put in place here, but it used to be like we didn't allow rentals in our strata. It was a bare land strata. So we didn't allow rentals because it always involved another suite, more cars and more people. All the water services were shared. So then that became unfair. But then if the person who owns the home was like, I don't have a job, I don't have money, I can't pay my rent, I can't pay my mortgage, I need to be able to support myself with this income from a rental suite. So in those cases, you have to think about, what kind of rights. You can't put somebody out on the street with your bylaws and kick them out of their home. That'd be a little heavy-handed. So in those cases, you might look for an exception and things like that.
So a lot of things have changed, Sean. We talked about the rental policy change. So even though there was a restriction on rentals, you can't do that anymore. There is still a couple of categories that I think can be affected. So you can still have a retirement age community. That is one of the remaining exceptions. So you can't discriminate by banning any particular group or age subset, except in the case of a retirement community, I believe. So that's still permitted. Did you have another couple of ideas that
there's
were in this
you
bucket?
can't have bylaws that conflict with federal provincial laws. So bylaws can't override federal provincial laws. You can't have bylaws that are too vague or arbitrary. So for instance, a bylaw that fines owners for inappropriate behavior without defining what's inappropriate behavior. You need to be not vague. It can't be open to interpretation, that type of thing. Bylaws must be clear and specific to be enforceable and fair. So you need that. You can't bylaws that prevent reasonable accommodations. Again, we're talking about probably rentals, or bylaws that prohibit wheelchair ramps or service animals without exception. Those type of things. Bylaws that attempt to fine tenants directly. Fines must be levied against the owner. So you can't have bylaws that say, oh, well, the owner doesn't have to pay, it has to be the tenant. Well, you can't do that. So what else we got? You can't have bylaws that don't follow proper adoption procedure. So you need to have bylaws that are voted on. They need to be filed with the land title office. They have to be done properly to be enforceable. Can't just write down, okay, well, these are our bylaws. We all agree on this. Okay, great. And no, that has to be filed. And so again, assistance with animals would be a violation of human rights as far as like people being denied that residence with their guide dog or emotional support animal, and bylaws that prevent reasonable use of common property. So unless there's a safety issue, you can't have restrictions on common area for specific owners or any owners. Can't ban people from using the common room or the fitness area or for private events and things like that, if that's what the purpose of those things are there for. So
some safety things, as you say, do apply. You could have a gymnasium where there's only access to gym equipment for those over the age of 14 if supervised, or 16 unsupervised. So that's reasonable, but you can't ban specific.
And you're being specific about it. So you're not being vague. It's like, can't have big party. It's like, well, what is a big party? You can't have for the fire limits or rules there. You can have a limit on the number of people, that type of thing. But you can't ban it.
Sean, we have partially covered this. Can we just reiterate what it is that we have to do to change our bylaws? So the first was that you recommended using a lawyer.
I think everybody should use a lawyer. I think you can discuss what you want bylaw wise. You review the bylaws you have now, write down the ideas, what's applicable to your strata and your owners, and what makes sense. For For instance, I was again with the Bearland Strata single family homes. You might have a bylaw that prevents people from dumping certain materials into the drain because you operate a lift station, and that's going to damage the lift station. And those considerations might not be for a different type of property. So, what was my?
Once you've
Yes,
got them, you've got to
that's right.
take them to a meeting of owners, whether it be an AGM
That's
or an
right.
SGM,
Outline them.
and they
Yep.
must vote.
Vote on them. It's going to take a while to prepare those. You might actually go to a lawyer to draft them up before anything's done and have that draft that all the owners can review before an AGM, and then you can vote on them at an AGM or an SGM. And then they have to be filed with Land Titles Office. And then from there, I'm not sure how long the process takes once it's in their hands, but it's not immediate. It takes some time to get them back and in place. And the whole process, at least when we did it, it was about a year-long process, of talking at a council meeting, because you're not spending all your time on this. You're week to week or month. You're having a once a month meeting about it, or we might have a couple of special meetings just to kind of speed up the process. But typically it took like a year for everybody to agree. This was 75 homes. Everybody to agree on, because then you'll have feedback or pushback. Well, no, I don't think that's appropriate, or this and that, and about the playground, the rentals. And so you have to have you'd be very lucky if you can get something that everybody accepted right off the bat. And then it goes to the lawyer, and then they'll file it for you. But I definitely recommend working with a lawyer on this stuff because it's important it's done properly. So a strata lawyer.
Absolutely. And the difference between a rule and a bylaw
rules. Rules
what?
are temporary. Rules can be placed in effect now at a council meeting, and they basically have the same, same purpose of a bylaw. But a rule expires after a period of time. Like by the time you come to your next AGM, that rule has to be, what do they call it, ratified, has to be reintroduced as a rule for another year, or it has to be eliminated, or it has to be made into your bylaws. So if it's something that you're going to keep permanently, you want to put it in your bylaws.
Right.
If it's going to be temporary, then you could carry it over year after year. But the rules are basically the same.
There's a difference in the fine amount as well, right? Because a rule typically has a maximum fine of, I think, $50, whereas your bylaws are higher.
They could be
can
higher.
Be a couple $100.
For sure. And rules are kind of a stop measure, I think, just to like, okay, this is something we didn't see occurring, and is something that's ongoing for one reason or another. And so you want to put a rule in place. And again, the council has to decide, do we want to make this rule? Because then we'll have to enforce it. And if everybody's on board with, this is very important, we'll enforce this one. But if it's just going to be like, here's a rule, you guys got to abide by this, and then nobody enforces it, then it's like that's a pointless exercise. So it's always good to tell your council, if you're doing a meeting, are you willing to enforce this? Because it comes down to the council. That's, and then they have to think, okay, well, is it really that important? No, I don't think it's really that important. Maybe, and maybe you can just discuss the issue with the owner. And, if it's one person doing something, you may not want to make a rule that applies to everybody. So, but if you need something to enforce, you need something on paper. So,
Sean, talk to us about what StrataPress can do to help strata councils and owners in communities to enforce and manage the bylaw process.
So we were communicating through StrataPress. We got these channels that you can communicate. Usually it's everybody at once. You can send out an update to all the owners at the same time. You can send a specific notice to one owner, or they can send a request. There was nothing that would really separate the issue of enforcing bylaws and fines. And so we built a system that allows you to basically create a template, and the template is based on the bylaws that you have in your strata. And eventually this is something that could be handled with AI and something we're working on, but for now it's a template thing. So we have what they call bylaw rules and references. So what we do is we created a bunch of templates on all these different things that you could have in your strata. These were just there for ideas, but barbecue smoke, I'm just giving you some examples. Belongings hanging off the balcony, dining lounge abuse, games room abuse, garbage spills, things like this, live Christmas trees. So we make these templates, and all you have to do is cut and paste the actual bylaw from your bylaws into the template. So I've got one here that just says dog barking. And if I open this up, it gives me the information about dog barking. Dogs must be firmly held on a leash in all public places, blah, blah, blah. So it goes through all the bylaw. Here's the bylaw. And then what happens is the council can now create, this is after you've done you sent them a letter and they continue to break the bylaw and there's another violation.
I seem to have lost Sean right at the moment that he was describing how it worked, but I'll bring him back.
Oh, sorry.
There he is.
I didn't get
He's
lost
back.
there. So I was just explaining that we've, if you got a volunteer, now they're in charge of, like, I got to send somebody a violation bylaw that tells them they got to pay this amount of money. Well, how do I write that letter? And so what we've done is we've done it for you. And it'll be based on whatever bylaws somebody has broken. So you choose the template based on the bylaws you created here. It's easier to show you, and anybody can ask and get a demo from us. The point is, it creates the letter for you. And it's a formal letter. It outlines the fines. It outlines the specific bylaw. It's addressed to one person. And when you send it through our system, it has a due date of when the response has to be received, when you can take the next step in the action. And it gives the strata owner that process. So they receive this letter and they get a clear understanding of how they can respond to it. And that response is all centrally located, so it never gets lost. It's not like, oh, well, I sent you an email, you didn't get it, or I wrote you a letter, you didn't get it.
You have the communication.
This is all done, and it's all centralized, so it's all kept in one spot. And all the council members can view it, and just the one owner it was sent to can view it. But it gives them a forum to argue, hey, wait, that's not what happened. This is what happened. And so there can be back and forth, and all that just gets documented. So with fines in place and, just a way of tracking, because it's kind of separate. This is a different issue than just asking for a new key fob or reporting a,
Yeah, this is not your standard communication. This is following a prescribed timeline with certain
and it has to be more
events.
formalized. It has to outline, here's what happened. Here's the dates of the complaint. Here's where we told you, to stop doing that. It just documents everything. The most important thing is that it gives that owner recourse. Oh, I didn't do that. That wasn't me. Or whatever. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. It gives them, it's better than receiving a letter, because now you got a letter in the mail and you're like, well, how do I respond to this? I send somebody an email? Do I need a lawyer?
It's clearly documented. You've got the records. You've got the ability for them to request their hearing or to respond. You can then follow that process through to, if necessary, finding under your bylaws and ensuring that
that's right. So we've got the bylaw.
Sean, if someone wants to see that, how do they reach you?
StrataPress.com, info@stratapress.com. You can email us or go to the website. You can book a demo through our website now. The new website has an easy option for booking a demo. And then we just set up a time and I'll send you some information, and then I can show you how this stuff works. I usually tell people 20 minutes will make you an expert. It's a little more now because there's a lot more features in StrataPress than when we first started. But these type of things, eventually we'll get into a realm of AI where it'll assist a strata owner a lot more. It'll do the same function, but it'll take out some of the steps you have to do to prepare these templates, for instance. So
that's what technology is great for, right? It's just streamlining some of the processes. It's not removing the humans, whether they be property managers or they be strata councils. It's about making them more efficient and better at doing what they do. Strata council members are all volunteers. They're doing this out of the goodness of their heart to protect their investment in their community.
And believe me, I've seen bylaws that are 1 page, maybe 2 pages, and I've seen bylaws that are 30 pages. So to be able to just ask the question, what's the pet bylaws in my strata, and get an answer with reference to the document itself, that's what we're looking for. As far as it's all designed to provide, easy access to information that's important. And bylaws are one of the most important things. It's one of the most requested documents when a property is being sold. People want to read the bylaws, and they want to make sure that they got bylaws in there that are enforceable. And if they're looking at the bylaws and going, well, they have these bylaws that talk about balconies and appearance, and it's nobody's doing any of that, then you're like, okay, well, this strata may not be that well run, because in the bylaws it says you can't have bikes on the balcony or you can't have flags in the window, and you can see that stuff on, so things like that, you get reviewed.
Fantastic. Well, Sean, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll have you back next month, pick up another
All right.
topic and share that with
Well,
strata owners, strata councils. and
Yeah,
property
thanks.
managers.
Thanks, Thomas. And I can just mention, go to stratapress.com, click on insights, and the blog I just posted was on this topic: how Strata Bylaws help manage your strata corporation. There's more ideas in there, there's more detail, and so you can have a look at that as well.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks.